Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Exodus 12. Yahweh spoke unto Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. I know that I told you last Sabbath that we were through talking about the new moon, and we were going to move into examining various aspects of the Lunar Sabbath doctrine today. Just when I think I'm out. Just when I think I've made it crystal clear what Rosh Chodesh means, it becomes obvious that I need to go over it at least one more time. So I am going to do that. Before we move on, we must be crystal clear in our understanding of the very precise Torah definition of Rosh Chodesh. It's not my definition. It's Torah's definition of Rosh Chodesh. We cannot allow altered definitions and faulty translations cause us to err in regards to what Torah actually says the definition is of Rosh Chodesh. I spent 85 minutes last Sabbath looking at this very issue from every possible scripture and Hebrew word that I could to show that the Bible does not mention a new moon celebration. In order to hold to a doctrine that states we're to celebrate the new moons, you have to infer things from the word of Yahweh that the word does not imply. And you have to get that doctrine from someplace outside of Torah. Inferences, to infer stuff that's not implied, inferences are a poor foundation upon which to build a doctrine. And conjecture is a dangerous way to build a doctrine. By conjecture, I mean to form an opinion, to come up with a supposition, to come to some kind of conclusion based on inconclusive facts, incomplete information. So the new moon celebration is built upon inferences and conjecture. It is not a biblically commanded celebration, all right? It's built purely upon altered definitions and conjecture. I know that's strong, and I know it's going to offend some people, but it's true nonetheless. I had to drive to Franklin, Tennessee, and to Waynesboro, Tennessee on Monday. That's a lot of windshield time for me. So I spent that time listening to several more YouTube teachings on the subject. A few more, I said, because I've already listened to a massive amount of them over the last 6 to 8 months, and even more than that over the last 6 years. So there's scores and scores of these videos that I've listened to. And as I listened to them on Monday, it grieved my heart to listen to some of the things that some of these teachers are saying. My heart cried out, and I said out loud to Yahweh, to myself, to nobody. I said out loud in my truck, no wonder there are so many confused people. It's sad, and it causes me sorrow, because there are all kind of things that all kind of teachers are saying about this subject. And when I say all kind of things, I mean they're saying all kind of things that cannot be supported by Scripture. And yet I know not one of these teachers lacks confidence in what they're saying. They're all confident they're correct. They're all confident that everybody else is wrong. Not one of them is hoping in their heart that they can mislead somebody. Not one of them is trying to deceive anybody. Not one of them has any desire to teach something that might be error. Yet the fact is, this is error. You know, we've talked about deceptions and traps before. Deceptions and traps, what makes them so, what's the word I'm looking for? Effective, thank you. What makes them so effective is the more they look like not a trap and not a deception, the better they work. It makes me tremble knowing that it's my duty to stand in front of you and in front of these cameras to dare and teach what Yahweh says about the subject. I don't do so with any kind of pride or arrogance. I don't do so with any kind of haughtiness. I'm a student and I'm a servant. But I also stand before you crying out as a desperate man to all who will listen to me, saying to anybody that'll listen, how can we possibly ignore the crystal clear definition of Rosh Chodesh that's given to us in Exodus 12:2? How is it possible to ignore that? How can we steal that phrase, Rosh Chodesh, out of Exodus 12:2? How can we steal that phrase, redefine it, and apply it to any other month than the blessed and holy month of Abib? Because Yahweh stated clearly and irrefutably that Rosh Chodesh applies only to the month of Abib. 1 month was the chief. 1 month was the head. 1 month was the top. And that's what Rosh means. Only 1 month has that designation, and Yahweh gave it that designation in Exodus 12:2. This month shall be unto you Rosh Chodesh. It shall be the first month, Rishon Chodesh, of the year to you. It says plainly this month. Not every month. This month. I don't know how we can possibly ignore that and be okay with creating a doctrine that requires you ignore that. You can't come up with a new moon celebration, new moon festival. You can't come up with that without ignoring this verse. I don't know how we can possibly change the meaning of Rosh Chodesh and declare that we can apply Rosh Chodesh to the beginning of every month and be okay with creating a doctrine that cannot exist unless we change the definition of those two words. How can it possibly be okay to ignore Exodus 12:2 and what it says and blatantly and defiantly alter the definition given to us? So believe me when I tell you this, I'm not looking to be controversial. I have no desire in me at all to come against any other preacher or teacher and what they're saying. I am simply a man who is asking a simple question. Does Rosh Chodesh mean head of the month? Or excuse me, head month. Does Rosh Chodesh mean head month? And if it does, and it does, how can you possibly take that term that is used to refer to Abib, how can you possibly take that term and use it to refer to every other month if it only means one? The only way to arrive at a doctrine for the celebration of the new moon is to mistranslate and use an incorrect definition of Rosh Chodesh that's given in Numbers 10, or to go to Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 and ignore the definition given to you in Exodus 12:2. Everybody understand that? So let's look back at Numbers 10. Numbers 10:10, also in the day of your gladness and in your solemn days and in the beginning of your months, it says in the King James. But it's the phrase Rosh Chodesh. You cannot get to this passage where it says, and in the Rosh Chodesh, you cannot get to this passage and arbitrarily decide that you want Rosh Chodesh to now be a reference to the beginning of all months. It's a violation of what Torah said. It's a very serious violation of honest and ethical scriptural interpretation. And then when we go to Numbers 28, that's used to support a new moon doctrine, we have it again. It says, and in the beginning of your months in the King James, but in Hebrew, in the Rosh Chodesh, you shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh. You cannot get to this passage and arbitrarily decide that you want Rosh Chodesh to now be a reference to the beginning of all months. Not when Exodus 12:2 tells you otherwise. That would be a very serious violation of honest and ethical scriptural interpretation. So, we got to make a decision when we get to Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 in light of Exodus 12:2. We have to make a decision. If we're true Bible students, and then we only have one of two choices to make once we're confronted with Rosh Chodesh, Numbers 10 and Numbers 28. You can only make one or two choices once you get this far in your study. You either have to ignore, reject, twist, and pervert what Exodus 12:2 says about Abib and create a new moon doctrine using Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 as your foundational text by pretending Rosh Chodesh means the beginning of all months instead of the head month of all months. You have to ignore, reject, twist, pervert, pretend, or the only other choice is you have to admit that Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 are talking about Abib, just like Exodus 12:2 was, and then begin to look with suspicion at every text and every translation that dares to use the phrase new moon. I can only do the latter. I refuse to turn a blind eye to Exodus 12:2 so I can build a different doctrine in Numbers 10 and Numbers 28. I refuse to allow the desire to adopt this new moon doctrine to influence me to misinterpret and alter the definition of Rosh Chodesh given in Exodus 12:2. So, when you do begin to look at all 20 places, remember we talked about that, there's 20 places, right? That it gets translated as new moon in the Tanakh. When you begin to look at all 20 places in the Tanakh that you see this phrase new moon, you do not have to have a degree in Hebrew to quickly discover that in every place, in all 20 places, new moon is translated from one Hebrew word. What is that Hebrew word? Say again? No, Rosh means head. Chodesh. So in all 20 places, you go look up where you see the word new moon, and you'll find the Hebrew word Chodesh. You will not find the Hebrew word for new, and you will not find the Hebrew word for moon. And there is a Hebrew word for new, and there is a Hebrew word for moon. So if these texts really were talking about a new moon festival or celebration, then they would have used the word, Hebrew word for new and the Hebrew word for moon. But it doesn't. It uses the word Chodesh. And Chodesh is translated 256 times as month. Only 20 times does it get translated as the words new moon. How much more evidence does one need to see that Chodesh means month? And that something suspect happened to cause it to be changed 20 times. It only gets translated new moon the 20 times that they, whoever they is, that they want to use it to support an unscriptural doctrine based on abusing and altering the term Rosh Chodesh found in Exodus 12:2, Numbers 10, and Numbers 28. Is that clear? All right. Let me put it up there. The only time Rosh Chodesh is translated as new moon is 20 times out of 276. When they want to justify their misuse and abuse of the term Rosh Chodesh. If you simply refuse to abuse the words Rosh Chodesh, you will never, never, never allow Chodesh to be translated as anything other than month. Ever. I briefly mentioned this last week, but I'm going to show you shocking examples of what I mean. I briefly mentioned, I think I listed the 8 places in just one slide, and you couldn't really read them, so we're going to go over 8 places this morning that are very important. And we're going to start with this one in Deuteronomy 1:3. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. Hebrew words there are Echad Yom Chodesh. Translated perfectly. Echad means one, Yom means day, or Echad means first, Yom means day, Chodesh means month. So Deuteronomy 1:3, on the first day of the month. What month is it? The 11th month. The Hebrew words there are absolutely correct. Now, I've heard teachers falsely infer from this passage and use conjecture to suggest that Moses is celebrating the new moon by calling an assembly and speaking on the first day of the month. But that's conjecture, and that's inferring what was never said or implied in the text. Notice this, in this one and in the other 7 that we will look at, the words Echad Yom Chodesh, we're going to find those words in all of them. But not one single one of those passages will take that opportunity to mention a new moon celebration. When is the new moon? The first day of the month, right? All right. So here we have 8 passages that mention Echad Yom Chodesh, or Echad Chodesh. They mention the first day of the month. Don't you think that would be a great, perfect time to say it was a new moon festival? It was a new moon celebration. So mark this and get this into your heart. If the new moon was celebrated on every first day of the month, these 8 passages would have clearly told us that on the first day of the month they were being obedient to the instruction for a new moon assembly or a new moon celebration. But none of them do. Why do none of them do that? Because the only way to arrive at the conclusion that these are new moon celebrations is to infer what the Bible does not state or imply, and to use conjecture as the foundation for your belief. Let's look at the other 7, and we're going to do this quickly. Numbers 1:1. Yahweh spake unto Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first day of the 2nd month. Everybody see that? Look closely at that passage. Not one word about a new moon celebration. Go back, mark these, go back and look at them. Not one word about a new moon celebration. Not one word about the new moon at all. It was just a casual mention of the first day of a 2nd month. You know why it's a casual mention of the first day of the 2nd month? Because it's not talking about Rosh Chodesh. It's just the first day of another month. That is not Rosh Chodesh. Keep going. 6 more. Numbers 33:38. For time's sake, I'm going to drop down to the end of the text. It says, in the first day of the 5th month. Read that text. Numbers 33:38. Read it. There is no new moon celebration mentioned at all. It was just the first day of an ordinary 5th month that Aaron made his departure out of the world, out of the earth. Ezra chapter 3 verse 6. From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto Yahweh. But the foundation of the temple of Yahweh was not yet laid. Now this one is different than the others. This one, they are actually offering burnt sacrifices on the first day. Why are they doing that? Holy Convocation. Why are they having a Holy Convocation on the first day of a month?
Shout.
Oh, it's the 7th month. And on the first day of the 7th month, what takes place? Yom Teruah, a Moedim. Wow. So this one is different because it's Yom Teruah, not a new moon. All right. What's the next one here? Nehemiah 8. I'm going to drop down and just read verse 2. You can read it all to get the context, but in verse 2, Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of what month? 7th month. So what are they celebrating? Yom Teruah. Not new moon. They're obeying the instruction in Leviticus 23 to shout before Yahweh. So this is not a called assembly for a new moon celebration, but it's a called assembly for Yom Teruah. The next one is Ezekiel 26. We're going to do all three of these together. Ezekiel 26, Ezekiel 29, and Ezekiel 32. Ezekiel 26, it just says Echad the Chodesh. All right? That's all it says. Doesn't really tell us which month it is. It just says Echad Chodesh. In chapter 29, verse 17, it says Echad Chodesh of the first month. Right? So that is Rosh Chodesh. That should get our attention. That is Abib. It's special. And yet there's still no mention of a new moon celebration. And then Ezekiel 32:1, it simply says Echad Chodesh of the 12th month. Again, no mention of a new moon celebration, just an ordinary first day of an ordinary month. So, here's what we just did. We looked at 8 distinct passages that clearly speak of the first day of the month, the Echad Chodesh, and yet not a single one of them said anything about a new moon celebration. Not one of them. Folks, that's significant.
Yes, it is.
In order to think there was a new moon celebration taking place, you have to infer what is not stated or implied, and you have to use conjecture as the foundation for that belief. Those 8 passages never mention a new moon celebration at all, and the fact that they don't should cause anyone who believes in a new moon doctrine to pause and be willing to take a more objective look at what they have been, what they have adopted as a sound doctrine. You understand? If you believe a new moon doctrine, those 8 passages should cause you to pause and say, wait just a minute. Here it clearly says first day of the month, and yet it doesn't say a word about new moon celebrations. Now that you have those 8 places, where it says the first day of the month, and not a single word about being used, not a single word being said about a new moon celebration, there are a few other things we need to clarify today. Y'all still with me? All right. We're going to go to Numbers 28 first. Numbers 28, we read this last week. Verses 11 through 15, we read it last week. I'm not going to read the entire text again today. I just want you to make note that Numbers 28 is talking about Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh only has one definition. Rosh means what? Head, top, chief. And in Exodus 12:2, we're told which month is the head, top, chief. What month is that? Abib. All right. So I just want you to see that here, that it says plainly in Numbers 28:14, and in the Rosh Chodesh you shall sound a ketzosera, a trumpet. All right. Now you look in Ezekiel 46. Again, I'm not going to read all of this because we read it last week. You can go back and look at it for yourself. I just want you to notice in verse 3, Chodesh gets mistranslated as new moon again. Chodesh does not mean new moon. Chodesh means month. So what month is Ezekiel 46 talking about? That's an important question because Ezekiel 46 goes to talking about sacrifices on this Chodesh. What month was Ezekiel talking about? We need to know that so we know what to do with the instruction that he's given us. Now, to discover what month it is, all you have to do is take Numbers 28 and Ezekiel 46 and set them side by side. So let's do that. In Numbers 28, here are the sacrifices that are listed. You got bullocks, rams, and lambs. 2 young bullocks, 1 ram, 7 lambs. You go to Ezekiel 46, and you see what Ezekiel 46 said to sacrifice on this day, and here's what he said. He's got bullocks, rams, and lambs, but what's different? The quantities are different. Instead of 2 bullocks, it's 1 bullock. 1 ram, instead of 7 lambs, it's 6 lambs. So the number of bullocks and lambs are less in Ezekiel 46, but the animals being used are exactly the same. That's not the only time that Ezekiel does that. He does it with other Moedim as well, where the number being listed are less. For that reason, I mentioned it last week. I'm going to say it to you again. Go do some research, study it out. For that reason, Ezekiel 46 was almost left out of the canon. There were some very heated arguments that took place as to whether it ought to be included in the canon. Wisely, they came to the conclusion it should be included because there are other considerations to take as to why Ezekiel changed it. One of them might be the fact that he's talking a lot about what the prince is to do and what the people are to do. All right? But here's where we have to be willing to consider the weight of these 2 texts. If Numbers 28 and if Ezekiel 46 were not talking about the exact same event, that had never been an argument about whether it ought to be included in the canon.
True.
Numbers 28 is talking about one specific thing. What's it talking about? Come on, you got to help me. Rosh Chodesh. So if Numbers 28 is talking about Rosh Chodesh, then Ezekiel 46 also has to be talking about Rosh Chodesh. We have to interpret Ezekiel 46 in light of Numbers 28. And Numbers 28 is very specific that the sacrifices are for Rosh Chodesh. I know I'm repeating myself, but we got to get this. And once you realize that Numbers 28 is specific, all you have to do then is go back to Exodus 12 to obtain the proper definition of the words Rosh Chodesh. So let me say it this way. I don't care how many translators translated Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 into the beginning of your months. I don't care. I don't care how many people claim that the beginning of your months is a reference to the beginning of every month. I don't care. All I care about is what Torah plainly says. And Torah in Exodus 12:2 plainly says Rosh Chodesh refers to 1 month and 1 month only. I'm going to stick with what Torah said, not what any translators have tried to make it say. Therefore, Ezekiel 46 is not talking about every new moon that comes around. It is specifically talking about one particular month. Rosh Chodesh always and only means the head month of the year. It always and only means the chief month of the year and the top month of the year. Always and only refers to the month of Abib. Rosh Chodesh cannot refer to anything else except for the month of Abib. Everybody see that? All right. So Ezekiel 46 is not listing sacrifices for a new moon celebration. Ezekiel 46 is just echoing Numbers 28. And Numbers 28 clearly identifies those sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh always refers to Abib. So, what month is Ezekiel 46 talking about? The month of Abib. Now look at us. That is the second phase of what we needed to cover this morning, and we've got that one done too. Phase number 1 is we looked at 8 places that the first day of the month is listed and saw that not one single one of them say one single word about any kind of new moon celebration. And if they don't, then nobody has the right or the authority to create a doctrine that says the first day of every month the new moon should be celebrated. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, we've made it abundantly clear that Ezekiel 46 and Numbers 28 are both talking about Rosh Chodesh, and Exodus 12:2 makes it crystal clear that that can only be a reference to Abib. So let's move on to the third phase of the study. This is going to excite you. There's 20 places that the new moon is mentioned. We're going to go over all 20 of them. All right? But I'm going to do it rapidly. So turn your brain on high speed. Here we go. Last week, let me say this before we go. Last week I spent a lot of time and I went into great detail on just a few of the places where the words new moon are used. So I'd recommend that you go back and listen to that teaching, look at those slides, make sure you have a solid understanding of that study on precisely what those Bible passages were actually saying. Right now I'm going to look at all 20, and I'm going to show you conclusively how none of those 20 places where we read the words new moon can possibly be talking about a new moon celebration. This is going to require me to speak clearly and you to listen intently. All right? And as I just said, it's also going to require you to go back and look at those others, get that information from last week and bring it forward to today. All right, the 20 places. Where do we start? We always start with 1 Samuel 20. The new moon is mentioned 3 times in 1 Samuel 20. Remember, because David said, tomorrow's the new moon. And then they talk about in 3 days. We're going to be doing this, this, and this in the next 3 days. And Jonathan said back to David, tomorrow's the new moon. So there was some concern that Saul was going to be upset within a 3-day span if David wasn't there to share a meal, right? It is an error to think that this passage is referring to some kind of new moon celebration. And here's the reason it's an error. Because when you read 1 Samuel 20, the Hebrew word for new is not there. I don't know how much more simple we can get. The Hebrew word for moon is not there. Chodesh means month. Whatever Jonathan, Saul, and David were doing, it lasted 3 days, at least 3 days. There is no 3-day new moon. Well, look at that. That new moon lasted 3 days. There's no 3-day new moon. But there could be a 3-day or longer celebration of Abib. Deuteronomy 16:1 says, observe the Chodesh of Abib. Observe the month of Abib. Not just the first day. We're in the month of Abib right now. It said observe it. What does the word observe mean? Glance at it? No. It means guard, protect, shield. Put a hedge of thorns around it. Okay? So, it certainly makes more sense that they would be observing Abib than just a new moon. And then we have this information. When David flees from Saul, and when we get to 1 Samuel 23, it marks what he did, where he went, and what he was doing, and who he was doing it with. When you get to 1 Samuel 23, he defends a threshing floor where the Philistines were attempting to rob grain. That means that it was 4 to 6 weeks after the first day of Abib. If they're threshing grain, it's 4 to 6 weeks after the first day of Abib. So it's clear that 1 Samuel 20 is not talking about a new moon celebration. It's talking about the month of Abib. The next one, 2 Kings chapter 4, tells a story of the Shunammite woman who goes to see the prophet when her son died. And I don't know why I put an E on the word son there for you. It is an error to think that her husband is referring to any kind of new moon celebration. Why is it an error to think that? There y'all go. Awesome. Hebrew word for new is not there. The Hebrew word for a moon is not there. Chodesh means month. The young boy was in the field with his dad doing what? What were they all doing out in the field? Reaping. They weren't plowing, they weren't planting, they were reaping. So if they're reaping, it has to be 4 to 6 weeks after Abib 1. That's why the dad says, this is not the Chodesh. The dad knew. Abib's over. Right? Abib's over. We're now to the harvesting phase. We celebrated Abib. We celebrated Passover. We celebrated unleavened bread. Both Sabbaths of the unleavened bread. We celebrated first fruit, but Abib's over. Why are you going to see the prophet today? Psalm 81. This psalm gives 3 distinct indicators that it's speaking about a chag that takes place in Abib, not about a new moon celebration that would take place every month. The occasion it is speaking of takes place, it said, in the month, the full moon, and during a chag. There are only 3 chags. Psalm 81 is talking about one of those chags. So it's an error to think that it's speaking of some type of new moon celebration. It's actually talking about the celebration that takes place on the full moon of the month of Abib. What celebration begins at the full moon of the month of Abib? Unleavened bread. 15th day of the first month. The next one, Isaiah 66:23. This passage simply and clearly states that in the coming kingdom, Yahweh says that all flesh shall come before him to worship Chodesh to Chodesh, Sabbath to Sabbath, month to month, Sabbath to Sabbath. That's just plain language. Ezekiel 46, we looked at that one a while ago. We already went over this. The sacrifices in Ezekiel 46 clearly identify those sacrifices to be those listed in Numbers 28 for Rosh Chodesh. And your Rosh Chodesh always refers to Abib. So it is an error to think that this is referring to some kind of new moon celebration. And for all of the same reasons that we have gone over on the other. Except for this one at the last reason is the sacrifices clearly identify the month that Ezekiel 46 to be talking about as the month of Abib, because those sacrifices are connected to Rosh Chodesh. Amos 8:5. The text clearly tells us that the wicked carnal man wants the Chodesh to be over so that he can harvest and sell his grain. What month is he wanting to be over so he can harvest and sell grain? Abib. So it's an error to think that this is referring to some kind of new moon celebration for all of the same reasons we've given concerning the others. It's a month that they want to harvest and sell their grain, which is the month of Abib. Bah. 1 Chronicles 23:31. In this chapter, David is assigning duties to the Levites for sacrifices, and 3 of them are listed. Sacrifices for the Sabbaths, the Chodeshes, and the Moeds, or the Moedim. Now, for future reference, I want you to notice here that Sabbaths are listed with Moedim, but separate from Moedim. Make a mental note of that. Sabbaths are listed with Moedim, but they're separate. It doesn't just throw Sabbaths under the title Moedim. They're separate. All right? According to Torah, there are sacrifices. This is important. According to Torah, there are sacrifices listed for Sabbaths, for Rosh Chodeshes, and for Moedim. So it's an error to think this passage is talking about sacrifices for a fabricated new moon doctrine or a new moon celebration. Because you're not going to go into Torah anywhere and say, okay, these are the sacrifices for Echad Yom Chodesh. These are the sacrifices for the first day of every month. But you can go into Torah and find where it says these are the sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh. Second Chronicles chapter 2, verse 4. Solomon announces he's going to build a temple for the purpose of offering sacrifices for the very same 3 occasions that David mentioned: Sabbaths, Chodeshes, and Moedim. In 2 Chronicles chapter 8, Solomon builds the temple and assigns the Levites the same duties as his father David did for Sabbaths, Chodeshes, and Moedim. Not new moons, Chodeshes. 2 Chronicles 31:3. After some apostasy by the nation, Hezekiah restores the temple and reinstates the same sacrifices for the same 3 occasions that are performed by the priest. And 2 Chronicles 31 adds this phrase, as it is written in Torah. That's significant. Because the only sacrifices you're going to find concerning any just Chodesh is Rosh Chodesh, and it's listed in Numbers 28. The sacrifices in Torah are for Sabbath, Rosh Chodesh, and Moedim. There are none for new moon listed anywhere. There's not one single command, one single Torah command for any kind of sacrifice on a random new moon day. All right, we've covered 13 of the 20 places new moon is mentioned. Ready for number 14? Ezra 3:5. Cyrus, the king of Persia, frees the Jews who had been taken into Babylonian captivity. They'd been there 70 years. He frees them, and they're sent back to Jerusalem to rebuild a temple for Yahweh. Ezra is their leader. We're told by the 7th month they're able to celebrate Sukkot. When does Sukkot fall in the 7th month? 15th day. So evidently they didn't have the temple up in time for Yom Teruah or Yom Kippur, because it's not mentioned. But they got it up in time for the sacrifices associated with Sukkot. Then verse 5 says, afterward. Afterward, they also offered. After Sukkot, they offered sacrifices, it says, for the Chodesh and the other Moedim. Rosh Chodesh is the only month listed in Torah that has sacrifices associated with it. So it says they celebrated Sukkot and afterward. How far afterward? All the way to the first month. By the time first month rolled around, they were ready for the sacrifices associated with Rosh Chodesh and for Passover and unleavened bread and first fruits. They were ready. Okay? And for all the other Moedim that would follow after that. So it's an error to think this is referring to some kind of new moon celebration. Chodesh means month, and it's the month that came afterwards. Number 15. Time that new moon is listed. Nehemiah 10:33. Read that one. It's so simple. I tell you what, we're going to read it because it is so simple once you read it. For the showbread and for the continual meat offering and for the continual burnt offering of the Sabbaths of the new moons, for the set feast and for the holy things and for the sin offerings to make an atonement for Israel and for all the work of the house of our Elohim. You see what it said? Of the Sabbaths of the new moons is the way it's translated. You see that? But do you see what it actually says? What word did they use to translate new moons? Chodesh. All right? So what it literally says is of the Sabbaths of the Chodeshes. Take the comma out because the comma wasn't there originally. It just simply, plainly says to offer the sacrifices of the Sabbaths of the Chodeshes. Every Chodesh has Sabbaths. Is that clear?
Yes.
Maybe it's more clear now that I put it up there like that. Of the Sabbaths of the new moons, no. Of the Sabbaths of the Chodeshes. All right, in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, we have two places that the words new moon are used. The wording used here is a direct reference to Leviticus 23. It lists the exact same three occasions that David listed, that Solomon listed, and that Hezekiah listed. The Chodeshes, the Sabbaths, and the Moedim. And there's only one Chodesh with assigned sacrifices, and that month is Rosh Chodesh. So the Chodesh that Isaiah 1 has to be talking about is Rosh Chodesh. We're getting close. Number 19, the 19th time new moon is mentioned. Ezekiel 45:17, and we're going to read this one too. And it shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings and meat offerings and drink offerings in the feast and in the new moons and in the Sabbaths. New moons comes from the word Chodesh. So Chodesh got translated here as new moons. Is it justified? Were they right and justified in changing Chodesh to new moons? Or is it clearly an error committed to fabricate a false doctrine of a new moon celebration and hope that you won't notice? All you got to do to see whether they were honest or not in changing the definition of Chodesh, all you have to do is read the next verse. Oh. Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, in the first month, in the first day of the month. The very next verse identifies the month that they're talking about. It's the first month, the Rishon Chodesh. Exodus 12:2 clearly tells us which month is Rishon Chodesh. What month is that? Abib. Thank y'all. So make sure you see what's plainly written there. Let it say what it says and hear it clearly. First month is Rishon Chodesh. So, it's an error to think that this is referring to some kind of new moon celebration, because the Hebrew word for new is not there. The Hebrew word for moon is not there. Chodesh means month, and this Chodesh is the Rishon Chodesh. It is an indisputable reference to Abib. The 20th time it's mentioned is in Hosea 2:11. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. This list is the same three that David listed, Solomon listed, and Hezekiah listed. The only difference here is that Hosea divides the Moedim into two groups. There's a regular Moedim and there's the Cogs. He separates the two out. Right? How many Cogs are they? Of the 7, how many of them are Cogs? 3. There you go. So his list looks different, but it's the exact same that David and Solomon and Hezekiah used. Hosea's list is Cogs, Sabbaths, Chodeshes, and Moedims, but Cogs can be included in Moedims because a Cog is a Moedim. Right. So it's an error, therefore, to think that this is referring to some kind of new moon celebration, because the Hebrew word for new is not there. The Hebrew word for moon is not there. Chodesh means month. And only one Chodesh has sacrifices similar to the Moedim and to the Sabbaths, and it is Rosh Chodesh. So you and I just went through all 20 places where Chodesh was wrongly translated as new moon, and we have indisputable proof that it shouldn't have been translated as new moon. It should have been left as month. What is our indisputable proof that they shouldn't have changed the definition or the word? All right, we're going to go back to slide 8 and start all over. All right. What do we know for a fact? The Hebrew word for new is not there. Hebrew word for moon is not there. And overwhelming evidence, Chodesh means month. So they were wrong to translate it. But we have far more proofs than just those 3 when we investigate those 20 passages. First of all, let me summarize the 20 passages we looked at. 5 of the 20, it should say there. 5 of the 20 clearly refer to harvesting grain. When you look at the context, 5 of the 20 refer to harvesting grain, which proves they're talking about Rosh Chodesh. 1 Samuel 20 through 23, 3 times new moon is used there, so that's the reason I say there's 5 of the 20. 2 Kings 4 and Amos 5, in all 3 of those places, 5 references, is talking about harvesting grain in the month of Abib. The next proof, 10 of the 20 are referring to sacrifices that Numbers 28 states are done on Rosh Chodesh. And Exodus 12:2 plainly states that Rosh Chodesh is the month of Abib. So I'm not going to read all of those, or did I put them? I didn't get it over there for you, did I? Maybe I'm going to go back and look. Yeah, they're there. Sorry. 1 Chronicles 23. So you can read those for yourself, but we just went over these 10 places new moon is mentioned. And they all refer to sacrifices made in Numbers 28. And Numbers 28 talks about Rosh Chodesh. And then the next 5 has plain language. Plain language, it proves they deceptively changed the definition of Chodesh. Psalm 81 is talking about a chag on the full moon. Isaiah 66:23 says plainly month to month, and it says it twice. Nehemiah 10:33 says plainly the Sabbaths of the Chodeshes. And Ezekiel 45:17 and 18 says plainly that it's talking about Rosh Chodesh. So all you have to do is look at these 20 and you have proof they never should have altered the definition of Rosh Chodesh or altered the definition of the word Chodesh even. The true meaning of Chodesh was altered to say new moon when it shouldn't have. It was altered to promote a doctrine that is not supported by one single verse in Torah. It's not a biblical doctrine at all. So anyone with eyes to see can and should see that in those 20 places where it was changed, there is undeniable proof that in those 20 places, it should have been left alone. So here's the conclusion of the matter. If you read commentaries, encyclopedias, and search historical data, you will find support for celebrating the new moon. Multitudes of commentaries will tell you there were new moon festivals. Just about everyone you pick up. Commentary on Amos 8, commentary on Isaiah 66. They'll all tell you, oh, this was a new moon festival they're celebrating. Multiple encyclopedias will tell you of new moon celebrations. You will find historical data that will tell you. If you want to go look, read some Philo stuff. Everybody likes to bring up Philo. Reject. You have to lay aside. You have to make void the word of God, the word of Yahweh, to hold to this commandment of men. Mm-hmm. I'm not willing to do that just to fit in. Stand up. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As his name is put upon you, so shall he himself